What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm back with another video. This time once again, we're looking at the best player in the NBA in every single category, ranging from scoring the basketball to passing, rebounding, as well as mindset and overall mentality. We'll have 20 different categories where I pick the best player in that certain aspect. So with that being said, let's get into the video and look at our first category, that being scoring. And as you guys know, when it comes to putting the ball in the basket, there is no better player than one Kevin Durant. He's a top 5 scorer of all time, and in today's NBA, the best overall scorer. In the regular season, he averaged 26.9 points per game, in the playoffs, 34.3. On its own, very impressive, but you add in the fact KD was coming off an Achilles injury, that makes it even more impressive. And when it came to the playoffs, he had 3 40-point games and 4 30-point games. And we're looking at his highest scoring games, he had 49 versus the Bucks, 48 versus the Bucks, and 42 versus the Celtics. And one thing I do want to note is that 48-point game versus the Bucks came in a Game 7, which is a Game 7 record for points scored. And staying with that Bucks series, in the last 3 games of that series, KD absolutely went off. He averaged 43 points per game, 12.3 boards, 6.3 assists, on 54, 36, and 79 splits. So when it comes to scoring the ball, Kevin Durant is unlike any player we've ever seen. I think it's pretty clear he's the best overall scorer in the NBA today. Now for our next category, we have passing as well as playmaking. And the best passer in the NBA is a 36-year-old LeBron James. And LeBron always has been a willing passer, but in his last 2 seasons, he's really taken on more of a point guard role and deferred the basketball, specifically to Anthony Davis. And you could look at the stats for this category as LeBron averaged 7.8 assists, it was the 7th highest in the NBA, he had 13 games of 10+ assists, and a season high of 13 assists. Also in the playoffs, he averaged 8 per game. But I mean, stats for passing and playmaking can only do so much. For this category, you really have to watch the games. And if you watch those games, LeBron can make virtually every pass on a basketball court. He made the bounce passes, the full court passes, behind the back passes, no look passes. Any pass you want, LeBron James is more than capable of making. And in my personal belief, his most impressive passing skill is reading the double teams and finding shooters in the corners. He is absolutely tremendous at reading the defense and being 3 to 4 steps ahead of them. Now for our next category, we have rebounding. And the best rebounder happens to be Clint Capella, one of the more underrated bigs in the NBA. And this year Clint averaged 14.3 boards, which is first in the NBA, and 4.7 offensive boards, which is also first. And when it came to this Hawks team, he was one of the few players on their roster who could be a force on the glass. I mean, this season, he had 6 games of 20+ boards, 24 games of 15+ boards, and 25 games of 10+ boards. He was an absolute beast on the glass, on the defensive end, as well as the offensive end. And he was a pretty underrated piece in their Eastern Conference Finals run. Now, looking ahead to our next category, we have shooting the basketball. And by far the best shooter in the NBA, as well as all time, is still Steph Curry. And Steph this past year was lights out from 3, shooting 42% on a career-high 12.7 attempts. And once again, he led the NBA in 3-point makes. And when it came down to it, it wasn't even close. The second-place finisher had 40 less threes than Steph. And if you look at his best shooting games, he had 39 games of 5 threes and 7 games of 10 threes. Those both rank first in the NBA. And if you want to go more in depth, when it came to above the break threes, Steph made 313 of those shots, which is first in the NBA, and shots 24+ feet back, Steph made 336, which is also first. So it's pretty obvious Steph is the best shooter in the NBA and still lights out from deep. Now looking at our next category, we have leadership, and once again, with a veteran point guard, this time that being Chris Paul. And CP3 over the past few years has been a great mentor to young guys like SGA, Darius Bazley, Dennis Schroeder, Lou Dort, as well as Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And I think this past year with his Suns, you saw Chris Paul's leadership on full display. He took DeAndre Ayton, a mid-tier center, and made him elite in the playoffs. That was due to his high basketball IQ, as well as his great mentorship. And for the leadership category, there really is no metrics, but for Chris Paul, the one thing I would look at is how much he improves teams once he gets there. In 2020, he took an OKC team that had a 0.2% chance of making the playoffs and made them to a top 5 seed. In his past year with the Suns, he was a huge piece of their run to the NBA Finals. So Chris Paul, in my opinion, is the best overall leader at 36 years old. Now for our next category, we have overall influence. And we're looking at a player's influence. You can look off the court as well as on the court. But in my own personal view, I prefer on the court influence. The most influential player on the court has to be Steph Curry. As in the past 5 to 7 years, Steph Curry has single-handedly changed the NBA. Go back to 2015, when Steph really popped off, teams were taking 22 threes a game. Now in 2021, teams take nearly 35 threes per game, and scoring is up a full 12 points. That is in large part due to Steph Curry, because back in 2015-2016, he showed teams you can win championships shooting three-pointers, and the overall influence he has on young players as well as young shooters is simply undeniable. And you could very well argue Steph Curry has gotten average NBA players way overpaid, because every team in the NBA now needs a three-point specialist. That once again is in large part due to Steph Curry. Now next up on our list, we have dunking the basketball. And when it comes to this category, what I look for in a dunker is the in-game dunker who posterizes players. And the guy I look to is Miles Bridges. I think this guy has been pretty under the radar when it comes to big-time poster dunks. Of course, you have Zion Williamson as well as Zach LaVine, but I think Miles Bridges has the most nasty poster dunks in the NBA. And even looking past that, the lobs he catches are absolutely insane. I think that overall blend of style, him being a powerful dunker as well as graceful, combined with the posters, makes him the best dunker in my eyes. Now next up, we have basketball mindset. And this once again is a very subjective category. But the player with the best mindset, I would say, is Giannis Antetokounmpo. And this kind of goes hand in hand with leadership, but Giannis is a player, his mindset is always focused on basketball, he loves his coaches as well as his teammates. And once again, he stayed with the Bucks and was loyal. That for today's NBA is extremely rare, but Giannis' mindset is a one-track mindset and his goal is winning championships. In my personal view, he did it the right way, staying in Milwaukee.
Like, it's easy to go somewhere and go and win a championship with somebody else. It's easy. I could go, I don't want to put anybody in the spot, but I could go to a super team and, just do my part and win a championship, still win.
Now next up, we have the best clutch player in the NBA. This category I think is pretty obvious, as the best clutch player is undoubtedly Damian Lillard. And if you look at the stats for this category, Dame is absolutely lethal in the clutch. This year, averaging 4.8 points per game on 51% shooting. That ranked first in the NBA. And when it came to clutch time scoring in the playoffs, he averaged 5.3 points per game on 60% shooting. That was also first. And for those stats, that's in the last 5 minutes of game within 5 points. But if you want to narrow the scope to the biggest clutch time moments, you can look at game time go-ahead shots in the final 24 seconds. Dame this past year was 5 for 8 on those shots, with the most makes in the NBA on the best percentage. And the pinnacle of Dame time came in the playoffs versus the Denver Nuggets. In that game, he had 55 points on insane shooting, but in the fourth quarter as well as OTs, he had 28 total points and multiple clutch time daggers. That game in particular was one of the best clutch time performances I've ever seen. Now looking at our next category, we have value as well as impact. And for this category, I went with Steph Curry. As you guys know, Steph this past year was carrying a bad Golden State team. And if you look at the value metrics, Steph was absolutely flawless. When it came to box plus minus, he was third. Offensive box plus minus, he was second. VORP, he was third. Win shares, he was seventh. And offensive win shares, he was sixth. One of 3 players to be top 7 in all those categories. But looking further than that, Golden State without Steph was absolutely horrendous, having a 2-7 record. But with Steph, they had a win percentage of 58.7. That would have been 5th in the West and 4th in the East. So with Steph playing, Golden State was a mid-tier playoff team and a possible contender. But without him, they were a surefire lottery team. And if you want to look at Steph's overall impact, I would simply watch the film and look at the games. Teams this past year, they would double, triple team, and even quadruple team Steph, depending on how good he was playing. No other player in the NBA had that type of impact. Now looking at our next category, we have dominance. And for this category, I went with Giannis, the Greek Freak. As in the playoffs, Giannis was absolutely unleashed and rivaled a prime Shaq. He averaged 30, 12, and 5, 1.2 blocks, as was 1.0 steals on 57% shooting. In nearly every facet of the game, Giannis was absolutely dominant, on the defensive end as well as the offensive end. And we're looking at his scoring, he went off in the playoffs. Versus the Suns, he had 50, 42, and 41-point games. And versus Brooklyn in Game 7, he had 40. And overall in that final series, he was simply unstoppable, averaging 35.2 points per game. And after Game 1, when he was healthy, he averaged 38.2 points per game. I mean, that right there is prime Shaq stuff, the most dominant player of all time. Giannis this past year exceeded all expectations and was dominant on both ends. I think it's pretty clear nobody's stopping Giannis at the paint or around the basket. Now the next category we have up is offensive versatility. And for this category, I went with the 7-foot sniper, that being Kevin Durant. And why I chose KD? Because on offense, he can do virtually everything and is flawless. He can pull from 35 feet, he can hit the mid-range, or he can get to the basket. And being 7 feet tall gives him a huge advantage over other players. Also, his passing and his playmaking has drastically improved. And like we saw in the playoffs, if Kyrie or Harden are hurt, KD can run point guard, he can be the 2 guard, the off guard 3, or even the 4 or the 5. And he isn't a small ball 4 or small ball 5. He can legit be your 5-man on a basketball court in 2021. Now looking at the defensive end, our next category, we have defensive versatility. And for this category, I went with Anthony Davis. As very similar to KD, he can guard 1 through 5 very, very effectively. And his specialty is probably 3 through 5, but if he has to check guards in the perimeter, he can definitely do that and is more than capable. And what makes AD so unique, he has size, he has length, and is a very good defensive IQ. Also, his foot speed and quickness and recovery ability is on par with a prime Kevin Garnett. So when it comes to defensive versatility and doing it all on that end, I think Anthony Davis is the best player in that category. Now next up, kind of going hand in hand, we are the best defensive player in the NBA. And for this, I might have a controversial pick. I went with Giannis Antetokounmpo as the best overall defender. And why I did that is very similar to Anthony Davis. He is so versatile on the defensive end. He can guard 5 through 2, and if he has to, maybe he can guard the 1. And when looking at defensive stats, they are hit or miss. And if we look at Giannis' ranks, he was 6th in defensive win shares, 3rd defensive box plus minus, and 7th in defensive rating. Very, very impressive, but defensive stats don't do it justice. If you want to know why Giannis is the best defender in the NBA, watch this short clip.
Block shot. This is one of the great recovery plays you'll ever see. The lob, Booker to Ayton. We've seen it many times.
That right there, from an all-time perspective, can be done by very, very few players, and Giannis happens to be one of those. That's why I say he's the best overall defender in the NBA. Now next up, we have the best handles and the best finisher. This is a 2-in-1 category with only one answer, that being Kyrie Irving. I mean, Kyrie Irving with the basketball is an absolute magician. He has the ball on a string, he can go behind the back, between the legs, hesitation, he can pull up, he can spin. I mean, Kyrie Irving with the basketball can do anything you can imagine and more. And when it comes to handles for this era, Kyrie is basically Pistol Pete. He's so far ahead of everyone else, it's really not even fair. Now when it comes to finishing, Kyrie is also extremely effective and great. The angles he can put the ball in are simply off the charts. He can go reverse, up and under, high off the glass, low off the glass, a George Gervin finger roll. When it comes to finishing the basketball, Kyrie is one of the best I've ever seen. And for today's NBA, he has the best handles as well as the best finishing. Now next up, we have the best bench player in the NBA, which happens to be Jordan Clarkson, the 6th man of the year. This past year, Clarkson averaged 18 a game, a career high, and the most player off the bench. Also 4 boards, 2.5 assists on 43, 35, and 90 splits. And for the Jazz, Clarkson was their spark plug and their 2nd best scorer. And when it came to playoffs, he was undoubtedly their X factor. And when looking at his scoring ability this past year, he had 2 40-point games, 3 30-point games, and 19 20-point games. In all those categories, it was a career high for Jordan Clarkson. Now moving on, looking at our next category, we have potential. And for this category, it's pretty tricky, but I looked at players under the age of 25. And the best under 25 player is Luka Doncic. And why I believe that was in the playoffs, he was absolutely dominant, averaging 35.7 points per game, 10.3 assists, 7.9 boards on 49, 41, and 53 splits. And when talking about young players in playoff basketball, most of the time there's some learning curve or some bumps in the road. But for Luka, he's had no problem adjusting. and I think with that being the case, Luka has the highest potential in the NBA. Now for our last category, we have the best freak athlete. And once again, there's many ways you can go with this, but I chose Zion Williamson. As Zion right now is 6'7" and 280 pounds. And when it comes to being physical and getting in the lane, he is simply unstoppable, shooting upwards of 60%. And we're looking at his overall body and physique, the dunks he has, the athletic plays, it simply boggles the mind how a guy that big can be that fast, as well as that strong and that agile. Zion Williamson quite literally is a one-of-one talent and a basketball unicorn. The only comparison I really see and understand is comparing him to someone like Charles Barkley. But even Barkley wasn't that imposing and that physically dominant. So as it stands right now, Zion is the best freak athlete in the NBA. So that right there is our final player in the last category on this list. As always, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.